Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive on cannabinoids and their potential for brain protection.
Yeah.
You've given us some really interesting research to look at.
Yeah.
We're going deep into how cannabinoids could be used for things like stroke and neurodegenerative diseases.
Absolutely. Those are some of the key areas where research is showing a lot of promise.
Okay, so before we jump into the specifics of these conditions,
Sure.
we really need to lay the groundwork and understand the playing field.
Yeah.
And that means understanding this thing called the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS.
The ECS,
What exactly is it?
right?
And why should we care about it when we talk about brain health?
So think of the ECS as your body's internal balancing system.
Mm.
It's all about maintaining homeostasis and, the system. It's involved in so many crucial functions like mood, appetite, pain perception, even learning and memory.
Okay.
But here's the really fascinating part. The ECS is also a key player in protecting our brains from damage.
Wait a minute. So our bodies actually have a built-in system for neuroprotection.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I remember reading that this whole ECS thing was a relatively recent discovery. Is that right?
Absolutely. It wasn't until the early 1990s that researchers led by the brilliant Dr. Rafael Mechoulam
Yeah.
identified the first endocannabinoids.
Okay.
These are molecules our bodies naturally produce that interact with the ECS.
So they're like keys that unlock the potential of the ECS.
That's a great way to put it. They really open the door to understanding how our bodies maintain balance and protect themselves.
These molecules,
Yes.
anandamide and 2-AG.
Yeah.
So these endocannabinoids are kind of like our body's own version of cannabis.
That's a good way to think about it. And just like cannabis, these endocannabinoids interact with specific receptors in our bodies called CB1 and CB2 receptors.
Okay, so we've got these endocannabinoids floating around interacting with these receptors.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into actual neuroprotection?
Right.
What's happening at the cellular level?
Well, this is where things get really interesting and maybe a bit complex.
Okay.
We're talking about a series of molecular events that scientists call signal transduction.
Okay.
So imagine a relay race where a message is passed from one runner to the next.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of what's happening when a cannabinoid binds to its receptor. It triggers this chain reaction, this cascade of signals within the cell.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into this molecular relay race.
All right, but buckle up because it's a fascinating but intricate process.
Okay.
First, picture this. A cannabinoid molecule like anandamide, or even one from cannabis, binds to a CB1 or CB2 receptor.
Uh-huh.
This binding event causes the receptor to change its shape, kind of like a lock fitting perfectly into its key.
Okay, so the cannabinoid is the key and the receptor is the lock.
Exactly.
What happens when the lock is opened?
Well, this shape change activates a family of proteins called G proteins.
G proteins.
These G proteins are like the messengers waiting for the signal to start running. They're attached to the receptor and are bound to a molecule called GDP, which keeps them inactive.
Okay.
But when the receptor changes shape, it's like flipping a switch.
Okay.
GDP is swapped for another molecule called GTP,
Uh-huh.
and this activates the G protein, setting it in motion.
So it's like a relay handoff. The activated G protein is now carrying the message forward.
Precisely.
Where does it go from there?
The activated G protein sets off this cascade of events interacting with other molecules inside the cell.
Okay.
These molecules are called second messengers. Think of them as relay runners passing the message down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Some key players in this relay race include molecules like KMP,
Okay.
pKa,
Mm-hmm.
calcium, and PLC.
Wow. It's like a carefully choreographed dance of molecules,
It is.
each one playing a specific role in transmitting the signal.
Exactly.
But what's the ultimate goal of this molecular relay race? How does it lead to neuroprotection?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the answer is it's complex. These signaling cascades can ultimately influence a wide range of cellular processes. But in terms of neuroprotection, some key outcomes include reducing inflammation, protecting neurons from damage, and even promoting the growth of new brain cells.
So it's like these cannabinoid signals are telling the brain cells, hey, let's calm things down, repair any damage,
Right.
and maybe even build some new connections while we're at it.
Exactly.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
But how does this all relate to the specific conditions you mentioned earlier, like stroke and neurodegenerative diseases?
Well, that's where the research gets really exciting.
Yeah.
Scientists are finding that these cannabinoid signaling pathways might be key to protecting the brain from the damage caused by those conditions.
Okay.
For example, in stroke, where blood flow to the brain is disrupted, these signaling pathways can help to reduce inflammation and protect neurons from dying.
So it's like cannabinoids are providing a sort of safety net for the brain during those critical moments when it's most vulnerable.
Exactly. And in neurodegenerative diseases where we see progressive loss of brain cells over time, cannabinoids might be able to slow down that process by protecting neurons and even promoting the growth of new brain cells.
This is truly groundbreaking stuff. It sounds like we're on the cusp of a new era in brain health, where cannabinoids could play a major role in treating some of the most challenging neurological conditions.
I agree. The research is moving at an incredible pace, and I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of cannabinoid therapeutics.
Wow.
But it's important to remember that we're still in the early stages of understanding this complex system. There's still much more to learn.
Well, I'm ready to keep diving deeper.
Yeah.
You mentioned that these signaling pathways involve a lot of different molecules.
Yes.
Like G proteins and second messengers. Can we break down those roles a bit further?
Sure.
I'm particularly interested in how they work together to achieve those neuroprotective effects.
Absolutely. Let's take a closer look at those key players in the cannabinoid signaling cascade. Remember those G proteins we talked about earlier? Well, they're not just messengers. They're actually a diverse family of proteins, each with its own unique role to play.
Okay, so it's not just one type of G protein. There's a whole team of them working together.
Exactly. Some of the key players in this team are Gunny, Goyo, and Gaius proteins.
Okay.
And each of them can interact with different effector molecules, those downstream targets that carry the signal forward, leading to a variety of cellular responses.
So it's like each G protein has its own specialty.
Yeah.
And depending on which one gets activated, it can trigger a different set of actions within the cell.
That's a great way to think about it. Now, one of the most important downstream targets of these G proteins is an enzyme called adenyl cyclase.
Adenyl cyclase, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Doesn't it have something to do with CAMP, one of those second messengers you mentioned earlier?
You're absolutely right. Adenyl cyclase is the enzyme responsible for producing CAMP.
Okay.
And CAMP is a very busy molecule involved in all sorts of cellular processes. But in the context of neuroprotection, it plays a key role in regulating neuronal survival and plasticity.
So when a cannabinoid binds to its receptor and activates a G protein, it can ultimately lead to changes in CAMP levels,
right?
Which then influences how neurons respond to stress and damage.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how a simple binding event can trigger a cascade of events, ultimately leading to changes in cellular behavior and even protecting the brain from harm.
It's like a domino effect, with each molecule influencing the next, ultimately leading to those neuroprotective outcomes.
Right.
But I'm curious, are there other pathways involved besides CAMP? I mean, you mentioned other second messengers like calcium and PLC. What roles do they play?
You're right. CAMP is just one piece of the puzzle. The cannabinoid signaling cascade is incredibly complex, involving multiple pathways that interact and influence each other.
That sounds like a beautifully orchestrated symphony of molecules.
It is.
Each playing its part to protect the brain.
That's a great analogy. And another important pathway involves calcium. Now, calcium is a very important signaling molecule in all kinds of cells, but it's especially critical in neurons, where it plays a role in everything from neurotransmitter release to synaptic plasticity.
So how do cannabinoids fit into the calcium signaling pathway?
Well, it turns out that some cannabinoids can actually modulate calcium levels within neurons.
Okay.
They can do this by influencing the activity of calcium channels, which are like gates that control the flow of calcium ions into and out of the cell.
So cannabinoids can act like gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Regulating the flow of calcium and ensuring that it stays within a safe range for neurons.
Exactly. And this ability to regulate calcium levels is thought to be another important mechanism by which cannabinoids can protect neurons from damage.
Okay.
For example, in conditions like stroke, where there is excessive calcium influx into neurons, cannabinoids might be able to help prevent that overload and protect those vulnerable cells.
It's fascinating how cannabinoids can target multiple pathways, simultaneously providing a sort of multi-pronged defense system for the brain.
It truly is, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface of understanding the complexity and potential of these signaling cascades.
Well, before we get too carried away with all the intricate details, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the bigger picture. We talked about G proteins, second messengers, calcium signaling.
Right.
But how does all of this molecular complexity translate into real-world therapeutic possibilities?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And while the research is still ongoing, the potential is immense.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to target specific components of these signaling pathways to enhance the neuroprotective effects of cannabinoids.
So instead of just using cannabis or cannabinoids in a general sense, we could potentially develop targeted therapies that precisely modulate those pathways to achieve specific therapeutic outcomes.
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about this research. By understanding the molecular mechanisms involved, we can develop more precise and effective treatments for a wide range of neurological conditions.
It's like moving from a shotgun approach to a laser-focused strategy.
Right.
Targeting the specific pathways that are most relevant for each condition.
That's a great analogy, and this approach could revolutionize how we treat conditions like stroke, TBI, and even neurodegenerative diseases.
This is truly groundbreaking stuff. I'm eager to hear more about those specific conditions and how cannabinoid-based therapies might be used to treat them.
Well, before we dive into those specifics, let's take a quick detour and explore another important family of signaling molecules involved in the cannabinoid cascade.
Okay.
The MAP kinases.
Okay, MAP kinases, those weren't on our initial list.
Yeah.
But I'm always up for exploring new molecular territory.
Right.
What are they and what roles do they play?
MAP kinases are enzymes that play a crucial role in transmitting signals within cells.
Okay.
They're like a chain of command with one MAP kinase activating the next in a cascade. And this cascade ultimately leads to changes in gene expression, protein synthesis, and even cell survival.
So they're kind of like the generals in the cannabinoid army.
Yeah.
Directing the troops and orchestrating the overall response.
That's a great way to visualize it. And there are three main MAP kinases that are particularly important in the context of neuroprotection.
Okay.
ERK, JNK, and P38.
Okay, so ERK, JNK, and P38, those names don't exactly roll off the tongue, but I'm intrigued. What do they do?
Well, each of these MAP kinases has its own unique set of targets and functions, but in general, they're all involved in regulating cellular responses to stress and damage. For example, ERK is often associated with cell survival and growth, while JNK and P38 are more involved in inflammation and apoptosis, which is programmed cell death.
So depending on which MAP kinase gets activated, it can either help protect the cell or contribute to its demise. It's like a delicate balance between life and death at the molecular level.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that cannabinoids can actually influence the activity of these MAP kinases, tilting the balance in favor of cell survival and neuroprotection.
So it's like cannabinoids are sending in reinforcements, bolstering the defenses of those vulnerable neurons, and helping them to withstand the onslaught of damage.
That's a great way to think about it. And this ability to modulate MAP kinase signaling is thought to be another key mechanism by which cannabinoids exert their neuroprotective effects.
This is really incredible stuff.
Yeah.
We've gone from those initial discoveries of the endocannabinoid system and those key molecules like anandamide and 2-AG, all the way down to these intricate signaling cascades involving G proteins, second messengers, and even MAP kinases.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how all these pieces fit together to create a complex and powerful system for neuroprotection.
I agree. It's a testament to the incredible complexity and elegance of our bodies, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface of understanding the full potential of the endocannabinoid system and its role in brain health.
Well, I'm eager to keep exploring. We've laid a solid foundation by understanding these molecular mechanisms.
All right.
But now I'm ready to dive deeper into those specific neurological conditions you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
Let's start with stroke. You mentioned that cannabinoids might be able to protect the brain from damage after a stroke.
Yes.
Could you tell us more about that research?
Sure. Absolutely. Let's delve into the fascinating world of cannabinoids and stroke.
Lead the way.
To understand how cannabinoids might help in stroke, we need to remember what happens during this event. A stroke occurs when blood flow to a part of the brain is interrupted, usually by a clot. This deprives brain cells of oxygen and nutrients, leading to damage and potentially death of those cells.
Right. It's like a power outage in the brain.
Yes.
And those cells start to shut down without that vital energy supply.
That's a great way to put it. And the longer that power outage lasts, the more extensive the damage becomes.
Okay.
So the key to minimizing brain damage after a stroke is to restore blood flow as quickly as possible.
That makes sense. But even if we restore blood flow, there's still the risk of further damage from inflammation.
Yes.
And those other processes you mentioned earlier, like excitotoxicity.
Exactly. And that's where cannabinoids come, and research suggests that they might offer protection against those secondary mechanisms of damage even after blood flow has been restored.
Okay, so how are they doing that? What's happening at the cellular level?
Well, remember those anti-inflammatory properties of cannabinoids we discussed earlier?
Yeah.
They come into play here after a stroke. There's a surge of inflammation in the brain, which can actually worsen the damage.
Right.
Cannabinoids can help to dampen that inflammatory response, protecting vulnerable brain cells.
So it's like they're calming the storm after the initial damage, preventing things from getting even worse.
Precisely. And then there's excitotoxicity, which is that overload of glutamate we talked about.
Right.
Cannabinoids can help to regulate glutamate levels and prevent that overstimulation, further protecting those brain cells.
It's like they're providing a double layer of protection, both reducing inflammation and preventing excitotoxicity. That's incredible. But what kind of evidence do we have that this actually works in real-life situations?
Well, there's a growing body of preclinical evidence from animal studies showing that cannabinoids can indeed reduce brain damage and improve functional outcomes after stroke. These studies have used a variety of cannabinoids, including THC, CBD, and even some synthetic cannabinoids that have been specifically designed for therapeutic purposes.
So it's not just about smoking cannabis after a stroke.
No.
We're talking about specific cannabinoids that are being investigated for their therapeutic potential.
Exactly. And these studies have shown that cannabinoids, when administered shortly after a stroke, can significantly reduce the size of the damaged area in the brain, leading to better recovery of motor function and cognitive abilities.
That's truly remarkable. So have there been any clinical trials in humans to test these findings?
There have been a few small clinical trials, but more research is definitely needed.
Sure.
Some early trials have shown promising results, suggesting that cannabinoids might improve functional outcomes in stroke patients.
Okay.
But we need larger, more rigorous trials to confirm these findings and determine the optimal doses and routes of administration.
It sounds like this is a really exciting area of research with a lot of potential. But what about those other conditions you mentioned earlier, like traumatic brain injury and neurodegenerative diseases?
Yeah.
Are cannabinoids being investigated for those as well?
Absolutely. In fact, the potential applications of cannabinoids in neurology are vast, and research is expanding rapidly into these other areas.
Oh, I'm ready to dive into those as well.
Right.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and explore those other conditions and the exciting research happening around them.
Sounds good. I'm ready for part 2 of our cannabinoid adventure.
Me too.
Welcome back.
We left off talking about the potential of cannabinoids for stroke.
Right.
And you mentioned that there's also research looking at their use in traumatic brain injury, or TBI.
Yes.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. TBI is a serious public health issue, and unfortunately, there aren't many effective treatments currently available. So researchers are really interested in exploring new therapeutic avenues.
Yeah.
And cannabinoids have emerged as a promising candidate.
But how similar are stroke and TBI?
Yeah.
In terms of the damage that occurs in the brain, do cannabinoids target the same mechanisms in both conditions?
That's a great question. While both involve damage to brain cells,
Okay.
the mechanisms can differ. In stroke, the primary issue is a lack of blood flow,
Right.
leading to cell death due to oxygen and nutrient deprivation.
Okay.
In TBI, the damage is caused by a direct impact to the head,
Right.
leading to bruising, tearing, and even bleeding in the brain.
So it's more like a physical injury.
Yes.
Rather than an interruption of blood supply.
Exactly. But even though the initial causes are different, both stroke and TBI can trigger secondary cascades of damage that involve inflammation, excitotoxicity, and oxidative stress. And this is where cannabinoids might be able to step in and provide protection.
So even though the initial injury is different,
Yeah.
the downstream consequences might be similar.
Right.
And that's where cannabinoids could exert their therapeutic effects.
Precisely, there's growing evidence from preclinical studies showing that cannabinoids, when administered after TBI, can help to reduce inflammation, modulate glutamate levels, and protect against oxidative damage, ultimately leading to improved functional outcomes.
It sounds like cannabinoids are acting as a sort of damage control system.
Yeah.
Mitigating those secondary cascades of damage that can worsen the initial injury.
That's a great way to think about it. And one of the most intriguing aspects of this research
Yeah.
is that cannabinoids might even be able to enhance neuroplasticity after TBI.
Now, neuroplasticity is essentially the brain's ability to rewire itself to form new connections and adapt after injury.
Exactly. And it's a crucial process for recovery. After TBI, studies have shown that certain cannabinoids might actually promote the formation of new synapses.
Oh.
And the growth of new connections between neurons, potentially enhancing the brain's ability to heal itself.
So it's not just about protecting existing neurons. It's also about helping the brain to repair and rebuild those lost connections. That's incredible.
It truly is. And while the research is still in its early stages, the potential of cannabinoids for TBI is incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
There's hope that they could not only reduce the initial damage, but also promote long-term recovery and improve the quality of life for individuals who have suffered these devastating injuries.
It's a glimmer of hope in a field where effective treatments are desperately needed.
Absolutely.
But let's move on to another challenging area, neurodegenerative diseases.
Sure.
You mentioned that cannabinoids are being investigated for conditions like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease,
Right.
and Huntington's disease. Can you tell us more about how those studies are progressing?
Of course, neurodegenerative diseases are incredibly complex, involving the progressive loss of brain cells over time. And sadly, there are no cures for these conditions, only treatments that can manage symptoms and potentially slow down the progression. That's why researchers are eagerly exploring new therapeutic avenues, and cannabinoids have emerged as a promising candidate.
But how could cannabinoids possibly help in these conditions where brain cells are literally dying off?
Well, remember all those mechanisms of neuroprotection we've discussed?
Yeah.
Reducing inflammation, modulating glutamate levels,
Right.
protecting against oxidative damage. Those mechanisms might be crucial in slowing down the progression of neurodegenerative diseases.
So even though cannabinoids might not be able to reverse the damage that's already been done,
Right.
they might be able to protect those remaining brain cells and prevent further damage.
Exactly. And there's even evidence suggesting that cannabinoids might promote neurogenesis, which is the birth of new brain cells in certain regions of the brain.
Wait, neurogenesis in adults? I thought that was only possible during early development.
That was the traditional thinking. But research in recent years has shown that neurogenesis can occur in certain areas of the adult brain, particularly in the hippocampus, which is crucial for learning and memory.
Okay.
And some studies have suggested that certain cannabinoids might actually stimulate neurogenesis in these regions.
So it's like giving the brain a boost,
Yes.
helping it to replenish those lost neurons and maintain its cognitive functions.
That's the hope. And while more research is needed to fully understand how cannabinoids influence neurogenesis in humans, the findings so far are incredibly intriguing.
This is really groundbreaking stuff.
It is.
So let's delve into some specific examples. How might cannabinoids be used to treat Alzheimer's disease,
Okay.
which is the most common form of dementia?
Alzheimer's disease is characterized by the accumulation of amyloid beta plaques and tau tangles in the brain. These abnormal protein aggregates are thought to disrupt neuronal communication and contribute to cell death. Research suggests that cannabinoids might have several beneficial effects in this context.
Okay, so how are they targeting those plaques and tangles? Are they breaking them down or preventing their formation?
Well, some studies have shown that certain cannabinoids, particularly THC, might be able to reduce the production of amyloid beta
Okay.
and even promote its clearance from the brain.
Hmm.
Others have shown that cannabinoids might inhibit the formation of tau tangles.
Okay.
And remember those anti-inflammatory properties of cannabinoids?
Right.
Well, inflammation is also a key player in Alzheimer's disease. And cannabinoids might help to dampen that inflammatory response, protecting vulnerable brain cells.
So it's like a multi-pronged attack, targeting those plaques and tangles, reducing inflammation, and potentially even promoting the growth of new brain cells.
Exactly. And while there's still much to learn, the research on cannabinoids for Alzheimer's disease is very promising. There's hope that they might offer a new approach to slowing down the progression of this devastating disease and improving the quality of life for individuals living with it.
It's a glimmer of hope for millions of people who are affected by Alzheimer's disease. But what about Parkinson's disease? How might cannabinoids be helpful in that condition?
Parkinson's disease is primarily caused by the loss of dopamine-producing neurons in a region of the brain called the substantia nigra. This loss of dopamine leads to the characteristic motor symptoms of Parkinson's, such as tremors, rigidity, and slowness of movement.
So the brain is essentially losing its ability to produce the chemical messenger.
Yes.
That's crucial for smooth, coordinated movements.
Exactly. And while there are medications available to replace dopamine or mimic its effects, they don't address the underlying neurodegeneration and often lose effectiveness over time.
Right.
So where do cannabinoids fit in?
Well, you mentioned earlier that cannabinoids might protect neurons from damage. Could they be protecting those dopamine-producing neurons in Parkinson's disease?
That's one possibility. Preclinical research in animal models has shown that certain cannabinoids might be able to protect those vulnerable neurons and even stimulate the production of dopamine.
So not just preventing further damage, but potentially boosting dopamine levels as well. That's incredible.
It truly is, and some early studies in humans have suggested that cannabinoids might be helpful in managing some of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, such as tremors and muscle rigidity. However, more research is needed to confirm these findings and determine the optimal doses and routes of administration.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential here.
There is.
But we need more research to translate those promising preclinical findings into effective treatments for humans.
Absolutely, and that's a common theme throughout cannabinoid research.
Yeah.
The preclinical evidence is often very compelling,
Uh-huh.
but we need more clinical trials in humans to confirm those findings and determine how to best utilize these compounds for therapeutic purposes.
It's like having all these pieces of a puzzle.
Right.
And we're still trying to figure out how they fit together to create the complete picture.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of puzzles, Huntington's disease is another challenging neurodegenerative condition where cannabinoids might hold some therapeutic promise.
Huntington's disease is a genetic disorder that causes progressive damage to brain cells, leading to a wide range of symptoms, including involuntary movements, cognitive decline, and psychiatric problems.
Exactly. It's a truly devastating disease with no cure.
Yeah.
But preclinical research has shown that certain cannabinoids might offer some protection against the neuronal damage seen in Huntington's disease.
So could cannabinoids potentially slow down the progression of this disease or even alleviate some of the symptoms?
That's the hope. Studies have shown that cannabinoids might reduce excitotoxicity, which is thought to play a major role in the neurodegeneration seen in Huntington's disease. They might also modulate inflammation and oxidative stress, further protecting those vulnerable brain cells.
So again, it's about targeting those multiple mechanisms of damage that contribute to the progression of the disease.
Precisely. And while the research on cannabinoids for Huntington's disease is still in its early stages, the preclinical findings are encouraging, and researchers are hopeful that they might lead to new therapies that can improve the lives of individuals living with this devastating condition.
It's inspiring to see how cannabinoid research is expanding into these challenging areas of neurodegenerative diseases.
It is.
Offering a glimmer of hope where effective treatments are desperately needed.
I agree. And beyond those specific conditions we've discussed, there's also growing interest in exploring the potential of cannabinoids for other neurological disorders such as epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, and even psychiatric conditions like anxiety and depression.
Wow, the potential applications seem to be almost endless.
They do.
But with all this exciting research happening, it's important to remember that there are still challenges and uncertainties surrounding the use of cannabinoids for therapeutic purposes.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges is the variability in cannabinoid content and effects between different strains of cannabis.
You mean like how some strains might be high in THC while others are high in CBD?
Yeah.
And even within those categories, there can be variations in the other cannabinoids and terpenes present.
Exactly. And this variability makes it difficult to standardize doses and predict therapeutic outcomes, especially when using whole plant cannabis preparations.
So it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Right.
With the composition of cannabis constantly changing.
Precisely. And that's why there's a growing interest in developing pharmaceutical-grade cannabinoid medications that have consistent and predictable effects.
So instead of relying on herbal remedies, we're moving towards evidence-based medicine.
Exactly.
Where we can control the dose and purity of the cannabinoids being used.
That's right. And this shift towards standardized cannabinoid medications is crucial for advancing the field and ensuring that patients are receiving safe and effective treatments.
It's like taking cannabinoids from the realm of folklore and traditional medicine into the realm of modern science and evidence-based practice.
Exactly. And another challenge lies in understanding the long-term effects of cannabinoid use, particularly in the context of medical treatment.
Right. We need to ensure that these therapies are not only effective, but also safe for long-term use. Are there any concerns about potential side effects?
Well, the short-term side effects of cannabinoids are generally mild things like dry mouth, drowsiness, and changes in appetite or mood.
Sure.
But there are concerns about potential long-term effects, especially on cognitive function and mental health, particularly in vulnerable populations such as adolescents.
So it's like any medication, we need to carefully weigh the benefits against the potential risks.
Right.
Especially when considering long-term use.
Absolutely. And that's why continued research is so crucial. We need to gather more data on the long-term safety and efficacy of cannabinoid therapies to ensure that we're using them responsibly and maximizing their therapeutic potential while minimizing any potential risks.
It's like a balancing act.
It is.
Acknowledging the exciting possibilities, while also proceeding with caution and scientific rigor.
Precisely. And this balanced perspective is essential for advancing the field of cannabinoid therapeutics and ensuring that these compounds reach their full potential in improving human health.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
It's been fascinating, hasn't it?
Yeah, I feel like we've taken a crash course in cannabinoid science.
Yeah.
From those early discoveries by Dr. Mechoulam to all this cutting-edge research, it seems like this field is just exploding with potential.
I agree. And I think as we wrap up, it's important to step back and think about what this growing interest in cannabinoids tells us about the future of healthcare.
What trends are you seeing as this field continues to evolve?
Well, one of the biggest trends is personalized medicine. As we talked about, cannabinoids have these really diverse effects, and they can be different depending on things like your genetics, your age, your lifestyle, even your gut microbiome.
Right. It's like a puzzle where everyone's biology is unique.
Exactly. And this really highlights the need to move away from that one-size-fits-all approach in healthcare and move towards a more personalized model where treatments are tailored to the individual.
So you're saying cannabinoids could play a big role in this shift towards personalized medicine?
I think they could be a major driver. Imagine a future where we use genetic testing and other biomarkers to predict how someone will respond to different cannabinoids. So we can choose the right compound at the right dose for the right patient.
It's like having a customized treatment plan for each person.
Exactly. And this vision of personalized cannabinoid medicine is getting closer to reality as research uncovers those specific molecular pathways and genetic factors.
It's exciting, and it really shows how important it is to invest in research that explores these differences and paves the way for those personalized cannabinoid therapies. But besides personalized medicine, what other trends are shaping the future of this field?
Another interesting trend is the focus on whole plant cannabis preparations instead of just isolated cannabinoids.
Right.
A lot of early research focused on isolating compounds like THC and CBD, but now we're realizing that all those compounds in cannabis, the terpenes, the flavonoids, they might work together to create these synergistic effects.
Entourage effect.
Exactly. And this is leading to a renewed interest in traditional ways of using cannabis, like smoking or vaporizing the whole flower. And we're also seeing the development of full-spectrum extracts that capture the complexity of the plant.
It's like rediscovering those ancient healing traditions and bringing them into modern medicine.
Yeah, and this move towards whole plant cannabis is driving innovation in new delivery methods to preserve those complex chemicals.
So we're moving beyond things like smoking or edibles.
Exactly. We're seeing sublingual sprays, transdermal patches, even inhaled nanoparticles for more precise dosing and faster absorption.
Wow, it's like a tech revolution in how we use cannabinoids.
It is. And as we understand the endocannabinoid system better, we're uncovering this vast network that goes way beyond the brain. The ECS isn't just in the brain, it's in the whole body. It regulates things like immune function, inflammation, metabolism, and gut health.
So the ECS is like this master regulator. It influences everything.
That's a great way to put it. And this is opening up new avenues for research and treatments. We're seeing more and more interest in using cannabinoids to modulate the immune system in autoimmune diseases, reduce inflammation in chronic conditions, and even change the gut microbiome for overall health.
It's like a whole new way of thinking about how our bodies work and how we can use the ECS to get healthy.
Precisely. And as we learn more about the endocannabinoid system, the potential for cannabinoid therapies keeps growing. We're entering this new era of medicine that takes a holistic approach, focuses on personalized treatments, and uses the power of these compounds to improve people's lives.
It's an inspiring vision, but we need to remember that this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
There's so much more to discover about the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoid therapies.
Absolutely. We need to keep researching to understand this complex system and how it interacts with our bodies to develop those safe and effective therapies.
It's a call to action for everyone, scientists, doctors, policymakers, and patients, to embrace the possibilities possibilities, but to also demand rigorous science and evidence-based practices.
I completely agree. And as we finish up here, I encourage everyone to stay curious, keep learning, and continue to explore the amazing world of cannabinoids.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating journey, and we can't wait to see what the future holds for this field.